literally too difficult because we just procrastinate a lot. That's a big
Yeah.
problem. You should have fixed a deadline just after the minor so that we can complete it easily.
And
Because
be done with it.
we had a lot of time and we just thought that we will do later.
That's a good point. Is that other people's experience as well?
Yeah, yes, sir. Same.
Yeah. So maybe it's what seemed like a compassionate gesture to say,
Because
haha,
we
he's not
had
really compassionate.
we have had our last minor on 17 February and we are submitting our this critical thinking assignment on 4th March, so it's little big.
It's too late, too much time.
Mm.
Okay, that's a good thing to note. Rajiv, I'm sorry you found the assignment boring. Um, uh, what did you find boring? What would have made it more fun? Or maybe Rajiv the library. Other thoughts, reactions? Writing 1,000 words are boring. Okay, maybe that's one issue. Um, Other reactions, reflections?
I mean, I had to like consider the word limit a bit too much and still went over it by a large margin.
Huh. So you're not in the Rajiv camp.
Yeah, I mean, totally opposite. Like 1,000 words are a bit too less to like express the views on an article that is about 6,000 words.
Hmm. Did you feel like the stuff that you had read in class made a difference in terms of me, what to spot, what to categorize?
Yes, like the article first of all started with the like highly emotive language,
Hmm.
the Robinson's article,
Yeah.
and like um, previously I would have thought that okay, I mean, okay, he's like targeting that point of like he's targeting that side of a human, and but after like considering all the examples we have covered in class of emotive languages, then it feels like his words had a particular motive of maybe masking some things or like attacking things that are not like logically attackable, something like that. I mean,
Okay.
his arguments were like some of his arguments were focused around what it is to be human, and you cannot do this because it's a human nature to not do this, and things like that.
Okay.
I mean, it's not wrong, but like that kind of perspective was highlighted.
Okay. Any other reactions?
Yes, sir. I think same too, because to respond to the article of around 5 to 6,000 words, we will require a lot more, to respond to every sentence about the article. But as Hemant said, I also did a less.
You put too much time. Put it off because you thought you had time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But at the end, I thought if I
Even
started it earlier,
even
then I would
I
have
had to read
more.
it 2 to 3 times because I just read it on 20 or 21 February, but then I had a big gap and then around
Come back
28 I
again.
read it again. So
Aditya, you had your hand up.
So I was disagreeing with Sumedha about that. About the like she said that it had a particular reason. Like she said that the author, like Robinson, had a particular reason to use emotive language, and I was mostly disagreeing about that reason. Like she said that it was to some like mask, and I was saying that Robinson is mostly focusing on ethics, and that does depend a lot upon what it means to be a human. And you can't really remove that because that was majorly the crux of the article, that killing people is bad. And that does depend on arguments such as this is not something that we should do.
I mean, like I said, it's not wrong. It was just highlighted a bit, like using emotive language is like, it's not like you cannot use anything that is emotive in your like speech or writing. It's okay to use emotive language, but uh, the target was a bit. I mean, it felt like he used it a bit too much in the starting. Like the later on in the essay, it decreased. The use of emotive language particularly decreased a bit, but just the starting few paragraphs were full of it.
Like, I agree with this. Like, I was mostly disagreeing that you said that it was too, let's say, camouflage a logical weakness. But I'm mostly disagreeing about that. It
I
was
don't
just
think
part of
you
the
guys
It
are.
it
can
was just
be.
part of the rhetoric. It wasn't too it wasn't, I didn't feel it was to camouflage a weakness.
Yeah, of
Which is
course,
acceptable.
the rest of the article was like the points he made were pretty logical also in the article. So, I mean, that wasn't the main point, but okay, my bad.
And it's
Sorry.
interesting that given that the context of all this discussion of propaganda, the most salient context in which propaganda these days occurs is in the context of wars. So it's sort of crazy that we've had a war start off, um, in the middle of a class on critical thinking. Okay, so we've had now a couple of weeks of discussion, and now moving on from the assignment issue. We've had now a couple of weeks worth of discussion on science in the tutorials, and today's reading is by these two well-known scientists. I think you or many of you would have heard the names of Richard Feynman and also Carl Sagan. How many of you have heard of Carl Sagan's name?
So I have heard, but I think I have just read a quote from him.
Okay. Aditya, you want to tell us who Carl Sagan is?
So I think he wrote Billions and Billions, right? I have read that book.
Okay.
I think I've read a couple of books by him. Like he's I think he's a cosmologist, and
Yeah.
he writes some pretty. And I'm not sure, but maybe he criticized religion in some book. I'm not sure if that happened, or I'm mixing him up with another author, or scientist. But yeah.
Yeah,
So
I remember
yeah,
I guess he wrote Cosmos.
he wrote Cosmos. Yeah, I think there's a TV show with that name. Which I think when we were kids in Doordarshan used to be would play in the 80s and the early 90s. Mukul, you had your hand up?
Yeah, so he is a cosmologist, astrophysicist. I watched a lot of videos of him, and there's this one famous commentary by him about the pale blue dot. So when one of this Voyager spacecraft was uh, was in the interstellar space, and it captured a image of Earth, and he told that on this very pale blue dot, everything that has happened in the history of Earth has happened on
I
this very
see.
small plate out. So that was very, like, it gave me goosebumps, and
Why did it give
I
you goosebumps?
like just imagining that from that far of a distance we are so small, but yet everything that has happened in our history is has happened on this pale blue dot.
Okay. Um, what about Feynman? Who's Feynman? Feynman. How many of you read his work or use his textbooks?
So I have read it.
What have you read, Aditya? So,
So
for people who don't know who is, let's have a little quick intro as to who he is. who he was no more.
He was a pretty famous physicist and Nobel laureate in around, I think, 19 in the early I think in the middle 1900s, and he took part in the Manhattan Project.
Okay.
He and he solved quantum electrodynamics, which is what he got the Nobel Prize for.
Mukul?
Yeah, he's this one of the most amazing physicists that we have ever had, and he wrote Feynman lectures, which I used to refer to during my JE time just for the sake of interest.
Huh.
And yeah, so he also has this amazing video lecture series.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Good videos, good lectures.
yeah, that's it.
How much
So,
of you? Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
also, there's the book Surely You're Joking, Mr. Finman, which is like partly I'm not autobiography, but I think it is transcribed by somebody else.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, he said it. He dictated it to somebody else. I'm not sure, but
In the course of your like a BTech at IIT, do you guys ever get to do the kinds of physics for which he won the Nobel Prize, or is that too advanced or too specialized or whatever?
so I don't think we have done quantum electro. I think there might be a few courses, but certainly not in the first 2 years. And maybe for the physics people, there are more courses related to that.
Rajiv, what's your sense? The physics person in the room. Okay, so it looks like he is studying this stuff. Okay. Yeah, so all of these things are true. Feynman, very famous physicist, public figure. In recent times, I think his reputation has, not his scientific reputation, but his reputation as a person has come in for some criticism. I haven't now, I can't remember where I read this, but in the wake of the Me Too allegations, which some of you would have come across a few years back of, um, um, a new open discussion about sexual harassment, and I think there were allegations against Feynman for, I don't know, predatory sexual behavior, or anyway. So that's something to add to the mix of what is generally regarded as um, a very illustrious career. I remember I got my PhD at Princeton, and it was like this. I think I remember meeting somebody who was like, "Oh wow, I'm staying in the same dorm room that Feynman had," or something like that. Like, wow, that's very cool. But anyway, so I'm giving you the plan for these few weeks is to give you really three different perspectives on the same kind of question. And the first perspective we got was the perspective of, let's say, the social reformer or the activist, right? The figure there was Dr. Narendra Dapolkar. And if you haven't watched the couple of episodes of that documentary Vivek, I really would recommend that you do so, um, and read them in conjunction with that article, because I wanted to make the connection that there's a way in which, I mean, there are many ways in which this stuff in the course has very real, like on the ground sorts of consequences. And you can see in that piece on, I can't remember the title, defining science or whatever, he's grappling with these issues of how to define the difference between science and superstition, but for this kind of practical social reform activity of um, the eradication of superstition, because in his view that he thought it led to harm. And there's a tradition, I think there were hints of it in that article, but also in the video lectures, of taking kind of this scientific spirit to also be a kind of part of the anti-caste toolkit, and I'm hoping I'm looking around for some readings on that connection. Why is that an interesting connection? For our purposes, or maybe even more narrowly for my purposes, it's an interesting thing to think about the ideal of critical thinking in relationship to religious or scriptural authority. And I mean, nowadays, I think you would be unlikely to see a strong defense on the basis of that kind of scriptural authority um, for the caste system. But that's maybe a relatively new phenomenon. And one kind of social reformer, I think, made this kind of appeal um, to the idea of reasoning, thinking for oneself, thinking scientifically as opposed to from a scriptural point of view, as part of that anti-caste plank. So famously, there's a thinker from Tamil Nadu called Periyar. I don't know if you've come across that name. How many of you have heard of Periyar?
Yes, sir. I have no.
Yes, sir, I have.
You heard of?
Like,
This
Perrier
figure,
was part of history books, like,
actually, you studied in school and stuff.
yeah.
So, anyway, so I'm looking for a reading that's specifically on this question, on the science question. So yeah, so that's one category of people for whom the question of what is scientific research or what characterizes science as opposed to something else, whether you call that pseudoscience, whether that's religion, whether that's aesthetics, poetry, that's one kind of figure. The other kind of figure, and we're reading the two people that I've assigned for today, belong to that camp, are practicing scientists. Right? And practicing scientists may have a different set of interests in defining what science is, or uh, trying to get at the distinction between science and pseudoscience, kind of for their own reasons. I think you'll see in both Sagan and Feynman, of course, they're kind of speaking to a popular, a general audience, but their perspective is that of reflective practitioners of their own craft. And so the plan for today is I just want to walk us through what they are saying about what science is versus what it isn't. And in the next, I would say, 3 lectures or so, what I want you to do is think about, well, I want us to discuss views about what science is from a third group of people, which is people who study the philosophy of science. So philosophers of science. And what I'm hoping is that you'll see that the sorts of formulations we saw in Dabholkar and maybe also in Feynman and Sagan, in some ways are much put it this way, things maybe are more complicated than they seem to be. That'll be one of the outcomes, hopefully, of this section of the course. But the other outcome of this section of the course, again, hopefully, will be a set of concepts and arguments which are kind of general purpose and can be applied to other things as well. So let's maybe just start with, because it's a longer piece, start with the piece by Sagan. I'm going to share my machine screen's already shared. You can see it.
Yes, sir.
Somebody want to read this passage? It's quite a beautifully written, but
Of course, sir. I will go.
complex. Okay, Hemant, go ahead.
So from where?
The passage I've highlighted. The human
The human
understanding.
The human understanding is not dry light but receives an infusion from the will and affections. Whence proceed sciences which may be called sciences as one would, for what a man had rather were true, he more readily believes. Therefore, he rejects difficult things from impatience of research, sober things because they narrow hope, the deeper things of nature from superstitions, the light of experience from arrogance and pride, lest his mind should seem to be occupied with things mean and transitory, things not commonly believed out of deference on the opinion of the vulgar. Numberless, in short, are the ways, and sometimes imperceptible, in which the affections color and infect the understanding.
Okay, so that's kind of complicated language from
Yes, sir,
400 years ago. Have people come across this name, Francis Bacon?
no, sir, I have not.
Anyone?
Yes,
Heard
sir.
this.
Who's Francis Bacon?
Uh, I think he made that what is called like he wrote something about empiricism that we should check on knowledge. That he was one of the first people to write stuff in Europe, at least, to write stuff about this.
That's right. So Francis Bacon is taken to be one of the key thinkers of um, thinkers and kind of advocates for um, the scientific method right at the start of or around the time of the scientific revolution. It's complicated language, but um, what's he trying to say? Um, well, maybe let me just, rather than tell you what he's trying to say, let me ask uh, people, what do you think Bacon's trying to say there in this passage? Let me maybe focus on this sentence. Um, what is he saying in these two sentences?
I think Francis Bacon is saying something like that. Um, what we think is true depends on what we want. Like this is mostly the second sentence, and the first sentence is mostly that this happens in a more structural manner and with the whole knowledge of the human, like whole sum of the knowledge of humans. Like we know more about stuff we care about, and that knowledge is also tends to flatter what we as a humans like to think.
Yeah, I think that's more or less right. I think when he's talking about sciences as one would, he's talking about. I mean, it's a joke. It's like, okay, this is the science of what we hope to be the case. That's as one would, it's an old-fashioned way of saying what I hope. I would that I was on holiday today. I hope I wish I was on holiday today. So the sciences as one would is like, what one wishes were to be true. That's what he means here. For what a man had rather were true. It's much easier to believe things that we wish or hope are true, or that don't disturb our existing beliefs. And then he gives this whole list of things as to why, uh, giving a list of explanations for why people don't believe, you might say, uncomfortable things or things that don't gel with their current beliefs. We reject difficult things because we're impatient, um, sober things because they narrow hope. So I don't know, maybe some people. What's an example of a sober thing that you could reject because it narrowed hope? What does that mean?
If, for example, like if we want to focus on current events, we could say that somebody who says that nuclear war is impossible because they do not want to think that about what would happen.
Yeah, maybe that's an example. Or climate change, maybe not the kind of thing, you just don't want to think about it. It's going to. So anyway, so he's giving you a list um, of things which seem kind of quite contemporary, right? If you were to translate this language into um, modern English, people reject things from the light and experience thing. I used to believe this, but now I've changed my mind because something has happened. Well, we are kind of arrogant. We want to always assume that we were never wrong in the first place. So I guess what I'm saying is human psychology maybe hasn't changed that much in the 400 years since Bacon wrote. So um, Sagan's piece is, I think it's a chapter in uh, a book he wrote called The Demon Haunted World, if I'm not mistaken. I've not read the book uh, itself, though I remember reading a very famous review of the book uh, many years ago. I think when I was in college and being struck by it, I'll post that review to you. What's his main point in the article? Well, the first part of the article is, he's just talking about his own experience with um, um, missing his parents after they're gone, and a kind of reflection of human vulnerability in the face of loss and sadness. And the thought is that that vulnerability makes us liable to be captured in um, fraudulent kind of ways. It's connected directly to the Bacon kind of thing, where um, uh, what we want to believe depends upon what uh, what our emotional life is, and our emotional life, if it's in this case involves um, uh, certain forms of vulnerability, would then make us susceptible, let's say, to paying money to people who claim that they can communicate with the dead, even if there's no evidence that they can, or that there's a lot of evidence that they can't. So that's the reflection. And I don't know if you recall, but in that second article, the article about Dabholkar and his work, which had those embedded YouTube clips, that activist, I can't remember his name, I think it's Poddar, he starts off by saying, people have, well, we live in we have difficult lives. People suffer, and as a result of that suffering, look for meaning, and sometimes find meaning in beliefs and activities that um, aren't, strictly speaking, well, are not sound on the basis of evidence, and again are vulnerable to being taken advantage of. So that's the first um, sort of uh, the part of the first claim. The second is stuff that you should, again, there are these famous figures um, whom he refers to. Um, I think maybe we should read a little bit of this because it will come up again in the next couple of weeks. Why don't, in fact, Hemant, you can just continue. Why don't you start reading from this on doctrinaire religions?
On doctrine.
From this highlighted portions.
Okay, sir. Okay. On doctrinal religions, men dare not avow,
Wow.
even to their own hearts, wrote the philosopher David Hume. The doubts which they entertain on such subjects they make a merit of implicit faith, the disguise to themselves their real infidelity by the strongest assertions and the most positive bigotry. This infidelity has profound moral consequences, as the American revolutionary Tom Paine wrote in The Age of Reason. Infidelity doesn't consist in believing or in disbelieving, it consists in professing to believe what one does not believe. It is impossible to calculate the moral mischief, if I may so express it, that mental lying has produced in society when man has so far corrupted and prostituted the chast- chastity of his mind as to subscribe his professional belief to things he does not believe. He has prepared himself for the commission of every other crime. T.S. Huxley's formulation was, the foundation of morality is to give up pretending to believe that for which there is no evidence, and repeating unintelligible propositions about things beyond the possibilities of knowledge.
Okay, thanks. So again, difficult language there. Again from 200 to 300 years ago. People are familiar with these names: David Hume, Tom Paine. Anyone? Tom Paine and T.H. Huxley. Who are these three people?
I have heard of David Hume and T.H. Huxley.
So what's the context in which you've heard of them?
Hume was a philosopher, and I think he wrote something about the mind.
So David Hume was a very famous philosopher who, yeah, he wrote two very, very famous books when he was very young. I mean, I think in his 20s, and known as one of the great empiricists. You use the term empirical. So Hume is a famous philosopher. Who's Huxley? T.H. Huxley. I don't think you said you'd heard of him.
No, sir, I have not heard.
Anyone?
So I was mixing him up with the author, but that's Alfred Huxley.
Author is Aldous, Aldous. T.H. Huxley was I think in fact he was a teacher, but he was very famously known as Darwin's bulldog, because when the theory of evolution was introduced in the UK, it was extremely controversial, and largely controversial because it went against established religious belief. And Darwin himself was like a, not like a real fighter that much. So it was left to people like Huxley to fight on his behalf, or rather to fight on the behalf of his ideas, to say that if there's a conflict between Christianity, what the Bible says, and what science says, then what science says should win out. I think the big controversy in Darwin's time had to do with the age of the Earth. Apparently, in biblical terms, the age of the Earth is like supposed to be not more than 8,000 years. And if Darwin's correct, and looks at these fossil records and things, the Earth is, very, very much older. Then that is one controversy. The other is that the idea that humans are not essentially different from animals, like in some deep kind of way, was profoundly disturbing to anyone who adopted or within a Christian worldview. And so, in one case, the Darwinian revolution of getting a great deal of pushback from established science. Yeah, so the theory of evolution. Tom Paine was a kind of political activist, writer. Interestingly, so he was, one of the theorists of the French Revolution. He had an effect, since again I'm drawing the anti-caste science connection. He made an impression on Jyotiba Phule. I don't know if you've come across that name, but you would have come across him in your.
Sir, I have heard this Jyotiba Phule, the
Yeah.
husband was Savitribai Phule.
Yeah.
Yes.
So social reformers, anti-caste activists from what is now Maharashtra. So they were actually quite influenced by Paine. So what are they saying? Like, what is all this stuff about infidelity, and what are this when they say? What does this mean? Men dare not avow, even to their own hearts, the doubts which they entertain on such subjects. What is it? And yeah, so what does that sentence mean?
Can I use the room?
Yeah, guys, give me 1 second. I'm just going to change my venue. Sorry, there's a bit of confusion about the venue. Oops, give me 1 second. Yeah. So what does that mean? Or rather, what are they talking about? Or when Payne says infidelity does not consist in believing or in disbelieving, consists in professing to believe what one does not believe. Or when Huxley says foundation of morality is to give up pretending to believe that for which there's no evidence. What's going on? What's the belief that they're concerned about? Why would they care about it so much?
I think they are trying to say that most people who claim to believe in religion and what it preaches are actually the ones who don't really believe, don't have much faith in the same thing, but they just just for their reputation or something, they are pretending to believe what everyone says.
So when you say that this term infidelity, like now when we use the term infidelity, we would take it to mean what?
Pretending to, what it says that
Oh, when you use the term in this term today, if I asked you for a lexical definition of this term infidelity, what would you get?
So it is mostly about like in sexual relationships about lying and also like being part in two sexual relationships while lying to somebody else, at least one
So
of them.
infidelity is a form of cheating, right? When you think of cheating on one's spouse or whatever, yeah, in a sexual context, is what the term is used to mean now, and obviously 300 years ago, they mean something else.
So I'm not sure if
Yeah.
this works. Like infidelity still means that if something does not match another thing, that still means infidelity. Like we talk about high fidelity or infidel forms of transmission. It's not exactly that. This is an simply mostly an archaic meaning. It
So there's some there's a reason why maybe fidelity has this fidelity in some ways, I guess, and that's in the sense in which you talk about high fidelity means kind of being true to something, and that's the sense that they have in mind. So why is this going on? He says, look, not consistent believing or disbelieving, inconsistent professing to believe what one does not believe. So what is it that people are professing to believe, and why is it that they're not believing it? What's going on? So Vedas made one stab at it. I think that's broadly correct. But anyone else?
Bandwagon effect, like that kind of thing.
Yeah. So but they're after in this period of 200-300 years, and I'm far from being an expert on this material, but then after a period of time when there's a kind of crisis in faith, and many people can no longer justify to themselves, look, why do I believe that God exists? When again in this story, the scientific revolution has undermined lots of specific beliefs, right? So the Copernican revolution removed the Earth as the center of the universe. Um, what's the debate that they're having? essentially a room for skepticism and and atheism. Um, Sorry, Hemant and Sumedha, you have your hands up?
Yes, one more reason would be like considering the time period, not believing in that thing means losing your life, more or
Losing your
less.
Just
life or losing your job.
Lelio
Yeah,
and Bruno
yeah.
also faced a lot of problems.
So being
Dr. Asif.
persecuted in various kinds of ways. So they're saying, look, uh, what they're pushing for is a society where you're not persecuted for your beliefs, and therefore you won't pretend. What's the worst thing you can do is to be pretending uh, to believe in God when you don't actually believe it. Um, it's quite striking, right? When a man has so far corrupted and prostituted the chastity of his mind as to subscribe his professional belief to things he does not believe, he has prepared for himself the commission of every other crime. It may seem kind of overheated to us, but you can imagine in a situation where, again, these are the social reformers of their time saying, look, guys, we have to live in a society where it's open to question, in this case, the Christian orthodoxy, and look around you, nobody actually believes this stuff anyway. People are going to church because of the bandwagon effect or because they won't get jobs unless they show up to church, etc. But I think for them, they see the dhancha of religion as something that um, is to be pushed against because they identify religion with um, orthodoxy, with not being able to question, as something that's regarded as not being open to question. Um, the reading I haven't sent it out as yet, but I will. That I'm going to assign for tutorial is also um on this idea that from which like a certain kind of stream of thinking about critical thinking has emerged. That is the importance of thinking for oneself um, um, in the context of like a um, let's say an orthodox society. There are many different kinds of uh, orthodoxies, but they're talking about a certain sort of um, religious orthodoxy, and therefore for them, not relying on faith, not relying on we should believe something because the Bible says we should believe it. That's the sort of thing that they're pushing back on. Particularly if, for instance, who you're going to believe. You're going to believe the Bible that the Earth is no more than 8,000 years ago, or are you going to believe Darwin because well, whatever evidence is granted by um, the theory of evolution? And for us, I think maybe in some ways maybe it's good that we are not that we're in a way removed from those particular debates. And I don't know today in India if there are debates of that kind of ferocity or uh, that kind of intellectual content. As can you think in India, would there be right now in the what would count as like an orthodoxy that nobody questions, that you would be persecuted for questioning, for instance, whether socially or politically or
Definitely, if we will go against God, we will say anything against God, that
yeah,
God
you would
does,
be persecuted.
there are chances maybe.
There are chances. So maybe certain kinds of skepticism about religion in India today would also have kind of adverse consequences.
Yeah, of course, because even many women journalists were also targeted in the past, like prostitutes. They were called.
But what does that have to do with religion?
No, sir. I think they have made comments on like Sita or Hindu goddess.
Hmm.
That's why they were called. So we can say it has a religion because and even many people are now supporting the Ravan. So that's why they are targeted.
No, maybe we're in a space where at least certain forms of questioning Hinduism, at least, I don't think there's a um, maybe it's that difficult to question other religions, but now is a kind of dangerous activity. As you can see, like maybe that's why Davolkar and Pansare um, were killed. Um, Anything else?
Well, I mean, this is like a bit relevant on a stretch, but I think these days religion and science for like a fraction of population coexists. Like
Hmm.
for for the example I'm going with, like my father is a scientist. Like
Right.
he has been a scientist, a person of science all his life, but he still like wakes up every morning and then uh, like do puja and just follows a routine and like religious practices. He visits temples like twice or thrice, like once in 3 4 months or something like that. I mean, he's still part of religious practices, but it does not mean that he scrutinizes the scientific approaches. Like they kind of coexist in his life, and I think that's true for many people. Like many people of like scientists in our like current country. I don't know about the world, but like even in India, because I have interacted, and you must have known things like that too, because like people who are scientists and they do research, they somehow still like religion. They don't really question it, but they don't really like get into those kind of debates.
Right. So they may have, it's possible to
It's
come. Yeah,
not
certainly.
science versus religion for them.
So I think you're exactly right. For many scientists in India and abroad, in their own minds at least, they don't see a tension between science and religion. Um, but let's get back to this, and it's an interesting question, which will, in some ways, will relate to the discussion that we're having now for the next couple of weeks. But other things that um, people are hypocritical about. Maybe that's another way to put it. What is the thing that they care about? They care about um, subscribing to things you don't believe, or professing to believe what one does not believe. What are the things that people might say they believe in these days that they don't really believe, um, because of the bandwagon effect or because they'll get into trouble? And I don't have an agenda. I'm just genuinely curious whether you have a sense of what those things would be.
Ironically, one thing would be like if someone claims to believe in religion, like
Okay.
like in like in particular community, like in schools or something like that. If someone is too religious, he would be made fun of to believe for believing in things that are not proved. And
Right.
um,
So it may be that atheism. So, but maybe then you're talking about a situation where it's kind of cool to be non-religious when in fact you are religious. That's the kind of
yeah,
picture.
yeah. I mean,
Fair enough. And again, this can be in different communities at different times. Different things can play this role. Sujit?
Yes, sir. Another similar example would be for the current condition, the nationality thing. If you talk anything that I don't like this thing, yeah, like Amir Khan talked a few years ago, then he was held apart. So things like that, that they will be accused of anti-nationalists and like that.
So maybe nationalism in the current uh, in the world we live in, there may be many people who would describe themselves as nationalists but they don't really believe that, because they'll get into trouble if they don't. But privately, may not care that much about being nationalists or not. Um, so I think that's possibly an example of something that's become an orthodoxy, um, where maybe a critical thinker has to open that box up.
One thing relevant to rationalism will be patriotism. Like
Okay.
uh, like my country is the world's best country and superior to everything else, and it is like no further. Something like that, around that mentality.
Yeah. So somebody who says, "Look, we are a mediocre country," would usually like, "What are you talking about here? Go to
Yeah.
Pakistan, go to
I
Russia,
mean,
go to
Mera
Ukraine."
Bharat Mahan and that kind
Yeah.
of thing.
Whereas in the US, it is very strange. The US really had this complex about it has to be like number one in anything, and really, people get really upset, like, "Oh my God,
Yes, 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 sir.
we're like
Okay.
number 15 on this scale of I don't know how well school
That's why, sir,
students do."
they all the indexes they have invented
Well, I
so
don't know
that they
about that, but I also feel like it's totally fine. Like if you're Finland or Denmark or something, you're like you may not be number one, but you're like a pretty good country. And so it's kind of depressing. I see in India also this thing of we have to be behind. It's not enough to be okay, but it could be great. Um, but I mean, in many respects we're not even okay, right? But the rhetoric is pointed towards greatness. Anyway, that's a different
I
debate.
want to distinguish between simply wanting to be great and wanting to be number one. I think
Okay.
wanting to be great can be like it is a good thing and we should want to be great. But
Okay.
wanting to be number one is like a zero sum game because only one country can ever be number one.
Fair enough.
And like I do think that in India also there is a concept, there's a idea of we want to be number one. I don't know how widespread it is with compared to America. I've never been to America,
Yeah.
but I still want to distinguish between because you said it differently and like
Fair enough.
there's a big difference. I
There's a
think
big difference in
both
the
of them.
conception. Sure. Fair enough. They're both competitive, but only one is zero sum, and the other, many different countries can be great, maybe in different ways. Um, Sujit, number one diplomacy. I'm not sure about that. Um, okay, so good. I'm glad we're spending more time on this beginning of the article than I had planned to, but it's useful because um, it reminds us a little bit of the stakes on the in the philosophy of science as they have at least evolved historically. So let me turn to now uh, other elements of the uh, the picture. So what Sagan does is, okay, look, people are vulnerable and can be taken advantage of in different kinds of ways. Um, People have um, but science may provide science, the scientific method. It's all may provide tools to combat that kind of uh, uh, to protect oneself against being taken advantage of. And then essentially the rest of the article, Sagan does two things. One is he talks about, look, the things that you should do if you take on the scientific um, lens, and then the things that you shouldn't do. And the things that you shouldn't do are many of them will be quite familiar. Um, let's um, I'm trying to think how much time I have um, to read things out. Maybe we should go a little bit slow on this. So while we have Hemant read out a bunch of stuff, so another volunteer can read out from here onwards the what skeptical thinking boils down to.
Umeda want today.
Hmm?
Today.
I'm now okay. I see two other hands. So we'll go with Sujit and then Sumedha.
Yes, sir. From where? What skeptical to others
What
will.
what skeptical thinking boils down to from here onwards.
Okay. So, what skeptical thinking boils down to is the means to construct and to understand a reasoned argument, and especially important to recognize a fallacious or fraudulent argument. The question is not whether we like the conclusion that emerges out of a train of reasoning, but whether the conclusion follows from the premise of starting point and whether the premise is true. Among the tools, wherever possible, there must be independent confirmation of the facts. Encourage substantive debate on evidence by knowledgeable proponents of all points of view. Arguments from authority carry little weight. Authorities have made mistakes in the past. They will do so again in the future. Perhaps a better way to say it is that in science there are no authorities. At most, there are experts.
Just pause that. What does this mean? In science, there are no authorities. At most, there are experts.
Yeah, I mean, there is. I think he wants to say that there is not a thing like God that one above all. Anyone can experts can uh, put their views, and based on their proofs, it will be considered.
What's the difference between authorities and experts? Okay, Subeda and then Hemant.
I think the difference arises from the point that authorities have made mistakes in the past and they will do so again in the future. The argument that authorities make are based on that whatever they say should not be questioned. While the arguments that experts make are based on the fact that whenever questioned, they can argue, like they can cross question and they can defend themselves, their own arguments. That kind of differences.
Okay, Hemant, then
Yes, sir,
Aditya.
of course. I was saying this, and I think, sir, like in authorities, we don't have much freedom to view our opinions. There are boundaries, but in science, there are no such kind of boundary. We can go at any length. If we have valid points to prove anything, then we that's acceptable. But in authorities, that's not the case, because whatever the authorities are saying, that must be true in each and every condition, without any opposition. So, I was
Aditya.
So like the thing is that in science there are people who will know more than you, but there are no people who can force you to accept anything. This is the, I think, main difference. That, like, there are people who will know more than you, which we can call expert, but there are no one whose word has to be taken as law, or like who have any power.
So what's the
People only have
example
knowledge.
of somebody who is an authority then? Are there any authorities?
In
Anyway?
like, for example, the government is an like, even in science institutions there are authorities. For example, journal is sort of an authority, because you sort of take that what they have printed is based on, you take it on their authority that they have only printed good results. So in science institutions they'll do from authority, but this is also like, this is a, like, I think this sentence is mostly a thing that should be true, but it's not exactly already true, because you need institutions and institutions create authorities.
So good. So one question that will come up now in the next couple of weeks is, to what extent is the picture that Sagan gives kind of an idealized picture? But just on, when he talks about authorities, I think he means people like, again, in the religious context, when somebody says like the Pope, if you've heard of this phrase, papal infallibility. Have you come across that? Papal is connected with the Pope, so this is the Catholic Church. But the idea is that, what the Pope says about Catholic doctrine, that's just what it is. There's no going back, there's no going beyond. You don't question, because the Pope has said it, therefore it must be true. That's the picture. And it needn't be associated only with the Pope, right? It could be with a revealed book. That's the context in which people usually talk about authorities. And I think all of you Sumedha, Hemant, Aditya touched upon the contrast with expertise is, well, experts offer reasons and or should be in a position to offer reasons. It's one thing to say, if you give an exam, if you answer a question in the exam and you disagree with the marks you get from the professor, in the expert mode, the professor should say, look, here's why I think you got it wrong, and it's ABC, and here's the right answer. But the authority version will say, don't question me. I'm the one, I'm the professor, and I know more about this than you do, and I don't have to give you reasons for why I think you don't know this. So I think one form of it is, is there a hierarchical relationship? But the other is, to what extent are you willing to provide reasons um, uh, for your claim? Yeah, Aditya, I see you still have your hand up.
Sorry, I just forgot to put it back.
Acha, theek hai. Okay, so let's carry on then. So from the spin. Sujit?
So, spin more than one hypothesis. If there's something to be explained, think of all the different ways in which it could be explained. Then think of tests by which you might systematically disprove each of the alternatives. What survives? The hypothesis that resist disproof in this Darwinian selection among multiple working hypotheses has a much better chance of being the right answer than if you had simply run with the first idea that caught your fancy.
Okay,
Try
and you'll
not
see, just pause for a second. Yeah, you'll see that Feynman also has a version of this. But yeah, but carry on.
Try not to get overly attached to a hypothesis just because it's yours. It's only a way station in the pursuit of knowledge. Ask yourself why you like the idea. Compare it fairly with alternatives. See if you can find reasons for rejecting it. If you don't, others will.
Any thoughts, comments, by the way, on these two? Attachment and generation of options. Agree, disagree? So, want to carry on?
So from quantify or the this is problem.
No, quantify.
Quantify if whatever it is you are explaining has some measures, some numerical quantity attached to it, you will be much better able to discriminate among competing hypotheses. What is vague and qualitative is open to many explanations. Of course, there are truths to be sought in many qualitative issues we are obliged to confront, but finding them is more challenging.
Okay.
If there If there a change of argument, every link in the chain must work, including the premise, not just most of them.
Right, because it's not going to be a valid argument unless it's not going to be a sound argument rather, unless the premises are true. It's not clear what he means by every link in the chain must work, whether it's a link of reasoning or on the premises themselves.
I think
But yeah,
what Sagan says is like you usually start from some premises and you make several um, inferences from them, one after the other, and use so every of the inference must be valid. This is sort of a chain of the inference, and every link in the chain must work.
Right. Sorry, I'm just going to switch off my phone. Um, that sounds right. Okay. Carry on.
Occam's razor, this convenient rule of thumb urges us when faced with two hypotheses that explain the data equally well to choose the simpler.
So have people come across this phrase, Occam's razor?
Yes, sir.
So what's an example of Occam's razor? This idea that when faced with two hypotheses that explain the data equally well, choose the simpler. Think back to the anti-superstition activism stuff. So you have these two. Think of any of the phenomena in that clip. You'll recall. You remember the one about the fire, about not being burned by fire. Do you guys know what I'm talking about?
By oil, you mean?
Oh, I was thinking of this. The fire not being hurt when your hand
Yeah.
touches fire.
Yeah, I remember.
So what are the two hypotheses that would explain? So there's somebody who is moving the hand up and down on fire and is not getting burned. What are the two hypotheses that can explain that? That people like Dabholkar are going after.
As far as I remember, they say that if for a boy to burn, the fire has to be there for a specific time. If it is not there for that amount of time, then the body will not burn.
So that's one hypothesis. And what's the other one?
I don't remember the other one.
Well, it's going to be the hypothesis that the person has some supernatural powers, right? That make them immune to pain, or they have some holy powers that only they have and nobody else has. So you might ask yourself, look, which of these yeah, go ahead.
Another hypothesis is that they have dipped their hands in water.
A third hypothesis, maybe they've dipped their hand in water. Why would one choose one over the other, or could one choose one over the other on the grounds of simplicity?
So I'm not sure how you can decide one of them. These are simpler. Like, I don't think this is any one of these is clearly simpler than the other.
Good. It's an interesting and kind of difficult question to assess the simplicity of hypotheses. Let me give you another example. Suppose there were these in the second wave last year. There was a lot of controversy about the number of people who had died because of COVID. Some of those you would have, you would recall. And again, I'm sorry, this is triggering or brings up bad stuff, is because it's in some sense still contemporary. Suppose somebody said, and if you remember, there are these famous photographs of bodies in the Ganga that are left behind because of the when the water recedes. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes, sir, in Gujarat too.
So one hypothesis that these are people who died and were left behind in the river because there's no other way to, or maybe no money to buy for the fuel, whatever, left behind. The other hypothesis might be that there were no bodies, but these are photoshopped images to make I don't know, to make the government look bad, to politically motivated photoshopped figures. Both of those hypotheses would explain the existence of these photographs. So is there a basis on which one could say one is simpler than the other? Yeah, Sujit.
Sir, I'm adding another one hypothesis that before, if these are not COVID dates, then generally generally the people were dying, then they had a place to burn, and the bodies were not floating. But as this is due to COVID, so there are more deaths.
So there's not enough space.
This is the first hypothesis, right?
That's what I thought. I was giving that hypothesis.
Okay.
So would there be? I guess my question is now. Let's assume these are the two hypotheses. Hypothesis one is bodies in the sand are the result are of people dying during COVID who could not be cremated. And then hypothesis number two, let's say, is there are no bodies in the sand. Photographs have been photoshopped. Doesn't look bad. And my question to you is, point one, is either of these hypotheses in any intuitive way simpler than the others?
So the first one seems simpler, but uh, like Occam's razor says that to choose the simpler one, but isn't it that the both the possibilities need to be explored and like examined? Like we cannot just dismiss another one.
Good. So you might see that um, maybe there's an internal tension between Sagan's ideas. One is like, don't reject anything out of hand, but look at reasons, and then the other is say, hey, drop the hypotheses that are more complicated. That's a nice catch.
So I don't
Yeah.
think like this was like Occam's razor is not like, I think this is more because I don't think Sagan says that you should choose one and then that becomes the truth. I think Sagan is saying that if if after knowing all that you can, you have two hypotheses which explain it equally well, and then you should keep the simpler one more in your mind because that is in some way more likely to be true, and not that you should just remove the second one. I don't think I can't exactly say that you should remove the second one here.
So here the issue is, where do you, on one kind of picture, it's guiding kind of where you focus your research, and on the other kind of picture, it's guiding after you've done your research, what should you be more likely to accept.
I
So
think it's
Sumeda's
both.
point is, don't use
Yeah,
Occam's razor to prevent thinking about the two alternatives.
Yeah, I think that Occam's principle should be applied after the research is completed.
That's
Like,
right.
it's a simpler, if the hypothesis is a bit simpler, then it is easier to explain to other people.
Okay.
So I
Yeah,
think
Aditya?
another problem with Occam's razor is that simpler is not well defined. Like I'm not sure which author said this, but some author said that the simplest hypothesis is always XYZ person did it. They are a witch. Like you can always make this hypothesis, and this is very simple, right? Like this because it is not like it requires like 5-6 words only. So how do you determine which hypothesis is simpler is pretty fraught. Like I think Occam's razor is still useful, like but only in cases when it is very clear that somebody is making a lot of justifications and not exactly justifications, but let's say epicycles to draw the word from the geocentric theory, which are not needed in another explanation.
Good. it's again, I'm hoping the reason I'm going so slowly through Sagan is a duality. One is just to appreciate the various elements in the toolkit, but also to recognize that maybe the elements are not so straightforward to apply and require certain kinds of elaboration. I think especially in the case of what counts as the simpler of two hypotheses is actually a pretty deep question. So the philosopher of science, as opposed to the working scientist, is likely to be much more questioning of this this idea of Occam's razor. By the way, scientists are often taken to be an authority on like what science is about. You're not supposed to question because they know what's going on. Philosophers of science tend to treat them as experts. As look, if you're reading to somebody like Sagan, well, you have this. You're certainly an expert. Tell us how you think science proceeds, and then but we can argue with you. We can question whether your understanding of these issues is actually correct. And one of the grounds that they might do that is, for instance, saying, look, you're saying that use Occam's razor, but you're not really telling us what is the on what basis should we think of one hypothesis as simpler than another. And
So
yeah, go ahead.
I think one kind of application of Occam's razor might be in the linguistic framing of what you want to say. Like if you have alternatives, like in maths, we encounter various statements that mean exactly the same thing, but the wordings are a bit complicated in one another and stuff like that. So using simpler words that don't need much explanation and justifications in those cases, like purely language point of view, I guess it can be applied in that
That's
field.
not. I mean, so simplicity may be preferable in lots of domains, but Occam's razor specifically means it's in the domain of deciding what to believe, not in terms of using simpler
How to
words.
express your beliefs. Okay.
So it's very specifically not about how to express your beliefs, but what to believe. And I think Aditya is right. I mean, there's a big literature on this, but it's not an easy thing to see immediately. Let's look at this last one. Sujit, want to read us this last paragraph?
Yes. Always ask whether the hypothesis can be, at least in principle, falsified. Propositions that are untestable, unfalsifiable, are not worth much. Unfalsifiable are not worth much. Consider the grand idea that our universe and everything in it is just an elementary particle, an electron, say in a much bigger cosmos. But if we can never acquire information from outside our universe, is not the idea incapable of disproof? You must be able to check assertions out. Invertebrate skeptics must be given the chance to follow your reasoning, to duplicate your experiments and see if they get the same result.
Okay, so I'm just going to pause that for a second. This notion of unfalsifiability is probably, if you ask a working scientist, let's say at IIT, tell me, okay, look, what is the key marker of science? I think they would say that science is falsifiable, whereas non-scientific activities are not falsifiable. What does it mean to say that something is falsifiable? Yeah, Aditya.
I think the second statement you said that non-scientific things are not falsifiable. That this is too wide. I don't. It is too wide of a statement to be accurate.
Okay.
Like you could say maybe that pseudoscientific stuff tends to be unfalsifiable hypothesis, but saying that all non-scientific stuff is unfalsifiable is I don't think correct.
Sure. But my question is, what does it mean to say that something is falsifiable?
So I would say that this means that there is some state of the world which can at least convince you that what you are saying is untrue, or which can show that what you are saying is untrue.
So what's an example of that?
As an example, let's say I'm in my room and there are no windows, and I think that there is raining. So this is falsifiable because I can go outside and see if the sun is if it's raining or not.
And in that case, well, the way you're falsifying it is by means of observation, right?
Yeah, or I can check it on the internet that if I trust the internet that is it raining in Delhi. Like,
okay. And so what's wrong with?
Sir,
Yeah, go ahead,
to
Subhida.
question Aditya, I mean, I just had a doubt that going by that logic that something is falsifiable means like to be able to check. Does that mean that everything that science claims is kind of experimental? Like there are various theories in science that have not yet been experimented on and stuff like that.
yeah, like in science, those are usually called hypotheses if there is not enough evidential evidence for them. Like as far as I know, science does depend a lot on evidential evidence.
Yeah, okay.
And I would also say that it is not exactly that you have to check. It is more about whether it can be checked hypothetically, or like if there is some state of the world which can prove it wrong.
I
So
mean,
let's
some
yeah, go
state
ahead.
of the world which can prove it wrong. Let's like I just want a further explanation. Let's take the theory of gravity, I guess, like gravitation force. Then what kind of state of world would prove it wrong? Like
Okay,
possible
so
state.
for example, let's say using the theory of gravity, I calculate that the gravity of the Earth should be 10 meters per second square. Then I drop something and it comes out to be 5 meters per second square, the acceleration. So then this has been proved wrong by experiment.
Okay.
No,
Thanks for the justification.
what's wrong with, like, why is falsifiability so important? What's wrong with unfalsifiability?
So because if something is unfalsifiable, like I think it is like because if something is unfalsifiable, you can't even say it's true, right? Because what does it mean for it to be true if it can't ever be false? It doesn't even remain a claim about the world.
So can you give me an example? What's an example of an unfalsifiable proposition?
This is somewhat more difficult, but for example, a classic example is the thought experiment of a dragon in the garage.
Okay.
I think Carl Sagan only said that one, but essentially, for example, somebody says that I have I have a dragon in my garage. So you say, okay, let's go and check, let's go and see him. So then he says that no, it's invisible. So you says, oh, then we can hear him. So no, it doesn't make any noise. And oh, we'll check his weight. No, it is weightless. Oh, we'll go and touch him, but no, you can't touch him. It's intangible. Like so on. And so the proposition is becoming essentially unfalsifiable because there is nothing you can know, nothing that can happen in the world which will prove it false.
That's a nice example. Yeah. So one thought is that, and we see this in a bit more detail. This notion of falsifiability is associated with the work of a philosopher of science called Karl Popper, and I think we'd read something from him next time, or next week. I think not this week. And Popper was bothered about theories that found a way of like blocking every possible counter argument. So Aditya is a nice example. The thing that I often think of is when you debate economists.
Sir,
Yeah, Rajiv.
on that statement that dragon in the garage, it can be falsified by okay. So you are saying that there is a dragon in the garage. Then first let define the dragon. Okay, what is dragon? Then give the statement. Okay, it is invisible or whatever. But first define it. You haven't defined, and you are saying go and look for the dragon. So it can falsify in that way.
Well, I'll throw it back to Aditya, who introduced the example.
So I think I get what you're saying, that you should make people claim everything they are claiming about the world first, and then decide what experiment you are saying, right?
And that's part of the problem with, I think, vagueness in. So the example that people like Popper would give is, and one problem with like vagueness and ambiguity, for instance, in the domain of horoscopes, is that if you phrase the horoscope in a sufficiently vague way, something good will happen to you next week, and also something bad will happen to you next week. It's very hard to, without more content, decide. Has the prediction failed? Because it's so likely that any week will contain something good as well as something bad. The example that, like I said, I think of in the context of, the debates about whether in economics, whether economics should count as a science, and then their economic hypothesis, like the hypothesis that man, or let's say human beings, are essentially self-interested. It's like an axiom of, well, that's putting it too strongly, but a lot of economists make that assumption as part of their, their models of rational choice. And if you talk to an economist and say, hey, I know a lot of people who are not self-interested. For instance, let's say they donate money to charity, or they give their time to some kind of worthwhile cause that doesn't directly affect them, then they'll say, oh, that's still a case of selfishness, except that, self-interest means something more. It doesn't only mean what can help you, physically. It can also be things that make you feel good. And then you can say, hey, what about somebody who sacrifices their, is happy to go and volunteer for some kind of suicide mission, doesn't make them feel happy. They're going to miss what the life that they have, but they think it's the right thing to do. Is that a case of, surely that's not a case of somebody who's acting selfishly or in an essentially self-interested manner. Sometimes they'll kind of just redefine that and say, well, they have a reputational stake, and that's why they're doing it. And if you go through sufficient iterations, then sometimes it feels, and this is a point that they made, that this is no longer really a claim about the world. To the extent that you're making a claim about the world, there should be some way in which the world can push back against the claim. And the thought of some things being falsifiable is, amongst other things, that your claim should be made such as it being easy to check against the world. And when you make claims that are not easy to check against the world, there's some suspicion that you are, lacking in rigors of some kind. Again, I think, like I said, most working scientists would think of falsifiability as a core aspect of what science is. Now, I think most working philosophers of science would say things are much more complicated than that. And we'll see for some reasons why.
Sir, I think
yeah.
we have.
You have another class?
No, I don't have another class, but sir, I was just saying that do we have any example of unfalsifiable? Because we are just discussing.
So for Popper, we'll see this in more detail. But for Popper, the big examples for him of unfalsifiable statements come. Yeah. So Rajiv, why don't you log off? I started late, so I'll just continue for a few more minutes. But if you need to do something else, you should feel free to. Yeah. So for Popper, the big examples were Marxism and Freudianism, and we'll look at them in a little bit more detail. Cases where, let's say, Marxism predicted like a workers' revolution, and every time you pointed out to a Marxist that look, you predicted that there is this revolution, but it hasn't happened. It's not like the Marxists will say, "Oh, that shows that my theory was wrong. Let me go back and fix my theory." It would just say, they'd say, "Look, there's this other bit in the theory that says that explains why in this particular case the workers' revolution didn't actually happen." Yeah, Aditya.
So I also want to say that falsifiability is also a bit more complicated. For example, to again take the example of gravity, suppose we say that the acceleration due to gravity is some number, right? And then suppose somebody is rolling suppose somebody is sliding something down a hill, and then they'll get a different acceleration due to gravity, like a different effective acceleration due to gravity because it is angled. And then we say that no, it's because it's angled. And then somebody else is rolling something down an inclined plane, and they'll get an other new acceleration. We'll say that no, it's because it's rolling. And for example, something is falling in water, and because of buoyancy, it gets another acceleration. And then we say no, it's because it's because of its water. So I'm saying that it is not simply that simply different because it's the fact that there are reasons to do it to not have for that thing to not happen is not enough to show unfalsifiability. It is also a more complicated mechanism. Like it can be a bit subtle.
It can be very subtle. So that's a nice set of examples. But yeah, but we will come back to this. We will come back to this next week. Okay, so let me wrap up here. Take a look at the Feynman. We didn't get to it, but this idea that a core portion of scientific integrity involves this testing the testing your hypotheses against the world and not believing in them until until they've cleared that test. At least for both Feynman and Sagan, I think they see this as really core aspects. The other thing that yeah, so let me maybe just pause at that since we're also out of time. But Aditya, you had a hand up.
So I already said what was
Okay, for that. Okay, so I'll post the readings for Thursday that introduce you to some of the backstory for ways of thinking about science, and I also post the reading for tutorials, which will be on this issue of believing things without evidence. That's a little bit of a heavier reading, but it's and in the context of religious belief.
I think, sir, you have not posted yet.
I haven't done it. No, I'll do that tonight. Yeah.
So can we have tutorials offline since many of us have started to onboard?
I'm happy to. I think this week will be a bit tough, but maybe from next week onwards, let's do that. But I'll have one tutorial that's open for anyone who's onboarded, and then one will be online or hybrid or whatever. How does that sound? What we'll do is, yeah, maybe we'll just start on the 14th.
Sir, from the next week, what will be discussing in the next from next week?
So this week and next week will all be about science, and then the week after that will be about data.
Data.
Yeah, thinking about data.
Okay.
Until the end of the course, and we have what 5 weeks left, right? Or 4 weeks left. 4 weeks.
I think, sir, you have said that we will be discussing like some anti-caste.
So that will be in the context of science. That will be in the. I'm just looking for a reading that we can pick up for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Righto. Bye bye.
Thank you.